Let's learn about fall damage. We're going to dig into how fall damage works, how it's affected by the coyote frames, and we'll learn why the whip is so weird. The whip in Spelunky 2 has some very strange interactions with fall damage. It can help you survive from heights you normally would take fall damage, and it can make you take damage from typically safe heights. Before we explore what the whip is doing, we need to understand how fall damage works. It's a common misunderstanding that the amount of fall damage taken is based on the distance fallen, but that's not the case. Fall damage is actually calculated from the amount of time falling, with a few caveats. To see how the fall timer works, we're going to display it over the character and observe it while taking some falls. You can see that when taking fall damage, the frame before the damage the fall timer was at 38. This is the lowest value that deals damage. We can compare it to a fall that did not take damage when the timer was lower than 38. Now let's talk about coyote frames. Coyote frames suspend your fall for a few frames and allow you to jump while hovering midair. When standing on the ground, the coyote timer is set to 4 at every frame. When hanging on a wall with climbing gloves or when grappling a tree, it's set to 6. When walking off a ledge, the timer decreases by 1 every frame. It's during this time that a mid-air coyote jump is possible. Now if we look at both timers at the same time, we can see how the fall timer interacts with the coyote timer. Notice the fall timer stays at 0 when coyote frames are active. Now we can go back to our whipping scenario and figure out what's going on. Take a look at our properties at this frame. We just left the whipping state, state 12. When in state 9, the falling state, when on coyote time, the fall timer stays at 0 and our Y velocity does not change. When in state 12, this logic does not occur and we act as if we are falling with no coyote time. We accelerate downwards and the fall timer increases. These two effects would cancel out, except check out what happens on the next frame. Since the whip state ended, we are now in state 9 with coyote frames, meaning we get the normal falling behavior. Our fall timer resets to 0, and our velocity no longer changes until coyote frames are over. The state of our character here is why this whipping technique works. We are now in the same position, with the same number of coyote frames left, but our Y velocity is faster, and it will remain faster for the entire descent. This gives us just enough extra speed to make it down before taking damage. Now that we've learned how to use the whip to drop from an extra height, let's take a look at Olmec and see if we can figure out why whipping causes fall damage. Olmec's platform has a peculiar height that makes fall timing slightly different from falling on a regular floor. Let's check out what's happened on this first frame of falling. Notice that the Y velocity in both is 0.01. For the non-whipping scenario, this is because the very first frame of falling, the game changed the state to the falling state after going through the fall logic. This velocity we get in the first frame is going to be very important, as we will see later. At the end of our coyote frames, we can see why whipping here causes trouble. In the first frame of falling, both whipping and not whipping gave us a velocity of 0.01. Whipping has increased our velocity by an additional 0.01 per frame, but has also increased the fall timer by 1. By not whipping, we use that initial velocity to move down for 4 coyote frames, where the fall timer wasn't increasing. And we also will now have a velocity that is 0.01 greater per unit of fall timer than in the whipping scenario for the rest of the fall. The reason whipping worked in the falls we were looking at earlier is that we ended the whip before the coyote frames ended, so the fall timer reset and we kept the extra velocity.